Happy Father's Day and welcome back. Hope everyone's having a wonderful Father's Day so far. I'm going to do a quick video today about my father's favorite player. As you know, my father is a huge fan of the St. Louis Cardinals. He doesn't mind the White Sox, but Cardinals are definitely his team. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I show off some cards. But first, just a few things. I attended the Chicago Sports Spectacular yesterday with some of my nephews and their father-in-law. So I'm hoping to be able to have that video out maybe later today, if not tomorrow, so you can kind of see everything from the card show. I'm not going to show you everything I got today from that card show, although one of the cards is going to be featured in this video, probably the big purchase. One of the things that's going to be held back is the big reveal of the first item I had to purchase from eBay that went through the authentication process where I had to go out to another authenticator to be able to say that it was an authentic card that I purchased. So I'm going to do that big reveal at the end of that video. And I'm really excited. So please hang in there and watch it until the end because you get to see the card that I got there. By far the coolest card I've gotten to date. All right, so with that said, just a couple other things. Saw one of my friends yesterday evening and we opened up a box of Heritage and his little daughter actually pulled the hit from the little Heritage blaster box, the Zach Greinke card. So they handed it over to me because she really isn't into cards. She just wanted to participate in opening something. So he offered it to me. So I definitely took it. Pretty happy with it because I think he's going to be a future Hall of Famer at some point when he's eligible. And also was able to get this Derek Jeter gold card from my friend Ravi too. So that was very generous of him. Definitely nice to add it to the collection. I had it previously, but ungraded. So it's nice to be able to kind of add it to the collection. And so it's a 7, but I'm definitely very happy with it. All right, so my dad was a fan of the St. Louis Cardinals growing up. That's no secret if you've listened to my channel to the channel up to this point. My dad and his father, so my grandfather, who I've actually never met because he passed before I was born, used to drive down to St. Louis from Peoria, Illinois to go to games because that was the team that my grandfather rooted for. And they would go to Sportsman Park and they would be able to see the St. Louis Cardinals, and sometimes they even drove down and saw the St. Louis Browns, probably during the late 40s into the early 50s, so shortly before the Browns moved. And during that time, my dad did collect cards. Unfortunately, none of them survived his mother, so they got tossed out, and I don't know, probably in the 60s at some point before he was even in college. So nothing survived, so it's kind of cool when I show my cards to my dad because sometimes he'll remember some of the ones from his childhood, some of the ones he won't. But we did talk about some of his favorite players during that time, and without question, his favorite player during that period of time from his childhood was Stan Musial. His father's favorite player was Dizzy Dean from the Gas House Gang. So they talked a lot about kind of the Gas House Gang and some of the players that were on that team. But my dad kind of fell in love with the Stan Musial and the teams that were in the 1950s. That like Slaughter, Shane Deist, and Musial being the biggest star. Stan Musial, I think, is probably maybe the most underrated best player in the game. Certainly, I wouldn't put him ahead of Mays or Aaron or Ruth. But when he retired, he may have been on the short list of like the top 5 players of all time. When he retired, he had records for career National League records for career hits, runs batted in, games played, at bats, runs scored, doubles. He was second in National League home runs, only behind Mel Ott. At that point, only one person in National League had ever hit 500 home runs. He was a 7-time batting champion, won the MVP award 3 times, and he appeared in 24 All-Star games, which is tied the record with Willie Mays and Hank Aaron. So you can see this guy really was a phenomenal ball player during his time period. His career WAR is 128.6. He has several batting titles to his name. And he actually batted .330 when he was 41, I think, years old, if I'm not mistaken. When he was pretty advanced age as a player, he was already still hit for .330. So Stan Musial, my dad would talk about him a lot, passed away about 9 years ago. Just seemed like a really nice guy, signed a lot of stuff, so it's very easy to get his items. But one of the things other people have talked about too on other channels too is you can get his stuff still relatively inexpensive when you compare it to other players of his era. He just kind of missed the early 40s, so he doesn't have cards in like the play ball sets with Ted Williams and with Joe DiMaggio. He was, I think, just in the minor leagues and beginning to debut at that time. So he didn't have cards in those sets. His debut was actually in September of 1941, so then he didn't make cards again until after the war, picking up in 1948. So Stan Musial doesn't really have very early career cards, so the early ones are going to be in the late 40s. So he doesn't really kind of get in that class with Musial and DiMaggio, with DiMaggio and Williams, even though his career probably paralleled Williams much closer than any other player that you could probably compare him to, because they debuted within 2 years of each other. So, and by the time he came back and was in the 50s, he was kind of getting near the end of his prime. At the same time, like the Mickey Mantles, the Hank Aaron's, and the Willie Mays were starting to debut. And he played in a much smaller market in St. Louis that, if you were west of the Mississippi, he was the biggest baseball player in that area. But if you were east of it, you had so many other options. Just some of the names I mentioned there, and let alone we didn't talk about some of the other Yankees that were really popular during that time, including Mickey Mantle. So he gets a little lost in the hobby, and it's actually to benefit to a collector. You can get his stuff still relatively inexpensive. So I'm going to show you some of the cards I have so far of his. I think it's a player run that I will try and complete of the major issues of his cards. So probably it would be Topps Bowman, and maybe even his Leaf if I could potentially get that at some point. Again, if I was trying to chase these down for like Jackie Robinson or Mickey Mantle, I couldn't. I just couldn't afford getting cards of those early 50 cards of these guys. But Stan Musial is really affordable, and maybe the hobby will never give him the love that he really deserves, even though everybody loves him in the hobby. But I could just see his cards potentially going up at some point. So I think I'm going to start with maybe going backwards to forward, kind of starting with his very last card. So there's 3 cards he had in the 1963 Topps set, and I'm just missing one. It's the only Topps card I'm missing. But the one I had actually I've featured on the channel before is his 1963 Topps card, and this one's actually autographed, which is really cool. I'm going to put it up in the corner over here. It's one of my favorite cards. When I did my list of my top 10, 15 favorite cards, it was number 1 of my slabbed cards. I've gotten some things recently that may displace that as number 1, but it still probably would be in the top 5. So we're going to keep that one there. He had one other card where he's featured with the Say Hey Kid. And I've shown this before on the channel. I think this is just such a great bargain if you can pick it up. Probably for under $50, you can at least get a PSA 4 of this card, and you have maybe the best player of all time, probably with questionably maybe the best player in the National League of all time at that time. Certainly he's been surpassed by Mays and Aaron and others, but it's just such a timeless card. So I'm going to put that one here in the back, and I think one that actually doesn't get a lot of hobby love in the way it probably should, in my opinion. And the other one's he's actually on a league leader card, because he was, I think, 3rd in the National League in hitting when he batted .330. We also have from 1962, he had 2 cards in 1962. Put these out. First one being one of these cards where they had tried to do kind of like an in-action shot where they had 3 different photos of the player. I don't really care for them all that much, but I was able to pick up this one really kind of inexpensive. And already graded, even though it's not the best condition, but it's okay. So this one featured him playing in his 21st season. So we'll kind of put that one off in the corner over here. And I'll slowly replace some of those as I'm pulling out other cards. And then we have his 1962 Topps card. This one obviously is set so condition sensitive because it shows the wear on the corners. Maybe not to the extent of like the 1971 Topps set, but getting a higher grade card of this, a higher conditioned grade card of this, it's going to cost you a little bit more money because of the set itself. So this is his 1962 Topps card. I think it's one of my favorites, just kind of seeing that left-handed coil swing that he was so famous for. I do have a raw card that's probably better conditioned of this other one that I mentioned previously. So I've had this one for a little while. I don't know if I'll ever put it through for grading because their cards aren't that expensive for him. So it may not be worth, the juice may not be worth the squeeze on this card, but it is better conditioned than the one I already have. So that would be 1962. And then we have 1961 Topps. He just has one card in the 1961 Topps set, and it's this one. This one's in pretty good shape. The corners are pretty sharp, but it's really off center. So I think this is one I might not put in for grading because I don't think it would grade out too high because of that issue alone. So that's his 1961 Topps card. So I'll put that over here. And I'm going to slowly start kind of swapping out some of the cards as I'm showing some other ones as we're getting down into the 1950s. But I have one more from 1960 to show you here from his 1960 Topps card. This one is not in a great grade, but has great eye appeal. There's some creases in the card that kind of take away from its grade, but don't take away too much from the eye appeal itself. The 1960 Topps card, I think it's one of his best cards personally. And I think it was like maybe the first graded Stan Musial I picked up, and relatively inexpensive. I think now it's kind of gone up quite a bit since then. I picked it up, I think, right before the pandemic started, so right before the card hobby exploded. So we're gonna probably bump out the 1962 Topps card there and put him in the corner, put Stan the Man. And now we're moving into the 1950s. He doesn't have a lot of cards in the 1950s because he had an exclusive contract with Bowman. And then when Bowman went bankrupt, he didn't sign on for Topps for a while. So there's only a couple cards from him from the 1950s for Topps. So let me show you, starting with 1959, he has two cards, one of them being the Baseball Thrills. This one is when Musial hit his 3,000 hit. It was a pretty good condition. I don't have it graded yet. It's a fairly inexpensive card to be able to pick up. I think like Mantle and some other big names have cards that are Baseball Thrills in the 1959 Topps set. But it was one I needed to be able to kind of complete, or pretty much complete the Musial run. As I mentioned, I'm just missing one. So this one is the 1959 base card for him. It's a PSA 3 in an older holder. Totally fine. You know, they may have graded it lower now if you went through regrading at this point. Mine came out like a 2. I think it's a pretty generous 3. But it's a nice little image of him. It was the first player card of his for a regular base card, because his first Topps card actually was an all-star card. So it was part of the high numbers that actually are readily available, and this one I think was either double or triple printed, so it's a very easy card to be able to pick up to get his first Topps card, which is pretty cool. It's a part of the All-Star series, has a little editorial on the back from Sports Magazine talking about him. I think these are really neat cards. And I've picked up recently some other All-Star cards I think I've shown on the channel from '58, including Ted Williams, and I've also had a graded Luis Aparicio. So we'll kind of bump now the 61 out of the way, and we'll put his 58. And that brings us to the final Stan Musial card I picked up, and it was one I picked up over the weekend at the card show, and totally well worth it. And this is one I've been on the hunt for a little while. It's probably from, probably one of my top 5 favorite sets. I've never really done a ranking, but this would definitely be in it. And it's probably one of his most iconic cards, apart from maybe his rookie year, and I think it probably surpasses his final card, which is also a pretty iconic image as well. And that's his 1953 Bowman color. It'll also be featured again in a video coming up on the channel from the sports card show, because I picked it up yesterday at the sports card show. And I have a little interview, if you guys are willing to kind of sit through it, with actually the guy that sold it to me, who was a huge Cardinal fan and actually met Stan Musial a few times. So I thought that was kind of an interesting addition to the video, just being able to kind of hear from someone that was a huge fan and met him. The Bowman color set, pretty iconic, and that image is hugely iconic for him in particular. And I was able to get a good price on it because I was able to go over a value that he was able to actually offer me a discount on the cards that I was purchasing. And for me, it just seemed like a no-brainer. I had been looking at lower grade ones previously, and so when I first saw a 3, I was like, maybe not. But then the more I thought about it, like, yeah, let me go ahead and get this SGC3 of Stan Musial. It looks really nice. It's a little off center. The edges are a little gnarly on one side, and that's, I think, part of the reason it brought this grade down. But as far as the eye appeal on the image itself, it's just as good as probably a 5 or a 6. It's the corners that kind of bring it down. So the image itself doesn't have like creases in the face, and the back doesn't have any staining other than normal aging you might see for a card of his age, which again is, you know, going back almost 70 years at this point. So that's it for Stan Musial. Again, if you're looking for a vintage, like all-time great, where you might be able to kind of collect his cards on a budget, consider looking at Stan Musial, because some of these other names that you're hearing flowing around the hobby, like Maze, Mantle, Aaron, they're going to cost you a lot more money. And if those are your guys you want to chase, go for it. For me, I think this is one that's pretty affordable to try and complete his player run at some point in the future. And I'm very happy to kind of start breaking into the Bowman cards. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Have a wonderful week, and happy Father's Day.